Hey, welcome back. I'm Jim. This is part 2 of my Stickley Sideboard build. I made a lot of mistakes in this episode, but I managed to get the carcass together. So I hope you enjoy. So we'll start off by getting the back legs cut to the same length as the front legs. This isn't quite as accurate as using knife lines in a shooting board, but I'm gonna just gang them up with a clamp and cut them all together. That'll be pretty close. And I'll use a little triangle here to make sure that I don't lose track of the orientation. It'd be pretty bad if I ended up cutting the mortises on the wrong face here. I'm doing some layout just for sanity checking, because I'm actually going to use the table saw to cut my tenons. I want them to be about a 1/4 inch, because I'm going to use a 1/4 inch router bit to cut my mortises. And I'll just cut from both the top and the bottom a whole bunch of times so that I end up with a perfectly centered tenon. Cut off these shoulders, and then I'll also cut out the center here since this is going to be a double tenon. Little fret saw is great for this and dovetails. The double tenon is really so that you don't have to cut out too much from the leg. If you made that just one big long tenon, it would apparently take too much meat out of it. I'll just use the tenons themselves to mark out with a pencil where the mortises need to go. I use the split fence here just to mark where the edge of the cutting flutes are on this end mill. And I'm just going to basically take a whole bunch of passes, raising the bit 1/8 of an inch every time until I get to my final depth. As long as you're pretty careful about raising and lowering, this works out without too much drama. Definitely not the fastest way, but you know, it's pretty easy to get done. So now I need to round the edges of these tenons so that they'll fit into my mortises. And if you think that my hand position is a little precarious, you're right. I am about to slightly injure myself here, so you might want to fast forward a little bit if you don't want to see that. Not too bad. It healed up in about a week. In a little bit, I'll even throw a glove over that band-aid, because I really don't want to leave any marks on this nice bright maple. Router plane is nice for just getting the fit perfect on these tenons. I don't want them to be too tight going into the mortise. And that's just about right. So I can kind of test fit at this point and see how things are going to go together. And this is the first time I'm really getting a sense of the scale of this thing. And I think it looks pretty cool. I'll start marking out the tapers on the legs. These are tapered in 2 directions. So I really just mark these out with a pencil, take them over to the bandsaw, and rough it out. This is actual speed, by the way. And it's pretty easy to now bring these right to where I want them with my hand plane. Doesn't really matter since this is cosmetic anyway, but it's nice if they all pretty closely match. So I can take my finished leg and use that one as a template for the other curves now. So at this point I realized I probably should have cut the lower rails that go between the 2 sides before I cut those tapers, but I still had my 2 reference faces, so it didn't really matter. So I just cut those 2 rails to length and used a pretty similar technique on the table saw to cut the tenons. And we'll just mock it up to see what this is going to look like. and mark for the mortise locations. So when Chris Schwarz put together this set of plans, he removed a feature that was holding the side panels to the legs, and that was just a tongue and groove joint. And you theoretically don't really need that because the whole surface is a really long, good glue joint, so you really can just rely on the glue. But that's only if you get your surfaces cut perfectly and there's no play, you know. So if the two sides of the side panel itself are not perfectly 90, you know, you're not really going to get a perfect glue joint. So I would really prefer to have kept that tongue and groove in here. It seemed like it was going together all right as I glued it up, but during the final glue up, as you'll see later, one of these sides actually popped open. So yeah, you know, it'd be nice if there was a tongue and groove here. I sort of realized this while I was putting together this first glue up. So on the second side assembly, I actually threw a couple of dominoes in off camera. I was really kind of thinking just for alignment purposes, because it was pretty tricky to get this side panel in the correct alignment, but it came out okay. So now I can start working on the curve in the front apron. I got it set up on my little tiny MFT table here so that it's well aligned with that center row of holes. And I'm setting up some trammel points so that I can just scratch in the curve that I want to cut. And now that I've got my curve marked out, I can use this really cool turning saw that I made from the Gramercy Tools kit. It's really nice to not have to change out your bandsaw blades all the time. You know, I've just got one curve to cut, so it's a lot easier to just pull that off the wall than it would be to remove that giant resaw blade. So now you can use some spoke shaves, rasps, sandpaper. I actually ended up busting out the oscillating spindle sander here just to finish it off. And now I can finally do a test fit. Probably should have made these joints just a tad looser, but it's going together okay. Always save your offcuts when you cut tapers, because you can use them as clamping cauls to evenly distribute the force. And here is where I popped open one of those side joints. So I kind of stared at it for a while and thought about what to do. I really wanted to get this done quickly, so I didn't think hard enough, and I decided to use pocket screws. I really wish I hadn't done this in retrospect. This is just kind of a pretty terrible idea. Super ugly to have those pocket holes present. And I'm sure that Stickley is really turning in his grave as I pop the head off of this one. They actually make pocket screws with finer threads that are supposed to be used in hardwood. I suppose you could probably pre-drill too, but maybe just don't use pocket screws on a piece of furniture like this. I should have slowed down, cut a biscuit, cut a domino, did something that wouldn't have left a mark on the piece. You know, luckily this thing will be sitting on the ground and you'd have to get underneath it to see those. I may actually cut some kind of plug at some point to cover those up. But yeah, don't do that. total amateur move. So I left this in the clamps for a while and pulled them all off, and it looks pretty good, I think, except for those horrendously ugly pocket holes. Well, all things considered, I think this turned out pretty well. In the next episode, I'll work on the web frame that the drawers will fit into, and maybe even the top as well. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.